Hey, everybody. Welcome back to Season 4 of Case Files with Kat.
And Ashley.
I mean, it's so different now. Can't you tell?
Yeah. We really changed up the format here.
So what did you do all summer? No, I'm just kidding. Oh my gosh, you guys. We you know what we did for 2 weeks? We were adults. Is that accurate?
I would say so, yeah.
We were just adulting hard.
Yep.
Super.
We did make a spreadsheet, though, so that's good. We did get that accomplished. We collectively filled out a spreadsheet of all of our episodes and the next 6 episodes we're going to do, so.
Well, 14, the next 14 episodes. Yeah. But I've already found like 4 more, so I've almost filled out Season 4. I'm pretty excited.
Yeah, I keep finding ones out and I'm like, oh, that sounds good. So, anyways, that's what we've
guess
done.
What? I know that we've promised you like not a lot of murder, but there's gonna be murder in there. You know, there's gonna. We can't help it.
To be fair, we have split it up, so we have disappearances and murders and UFO stories this season, all kinds of stuff, more paranormal. So it won't be like 15 murders in a row and then like 20 disappearances. You know, we actually kind of have some kind of like organization now. So I don't know how long it'll last, but we have it.
Well, and I'm so glad we've actually the world is opening up. I hope around you're getting to enjoy the beautiful weather, except here right now it's Noah's Ark. I think I just saw it go by. It's raining. It's been raining so hard and so long. So I hope all of you have been enjoying being out and about. It's springtime and the bars are opening back up. I stopped by Blay, our Beers Looking at You friends from Season 1, our beloved friends over there. And so they are open 100%. But again, our friends are suffering and still kind of stuttering to get back to what life was pre-pandemic.
A lot of the Houston ones are opened back up if you're in the Houston area, but they still have like a lot of like, you know, catching up to do and regulations and stuff. They have limited hours. A lot of them still have just outdoor only. Yeah. But
that's due to staffing in a lot of ways. So, you know, we're hoping that everybody who hears this, please know all of your local breweries are hiring.
Yes. And they all need you to drink more, even if it's at home. They need you to buy their beers.
Alcoholism. Yes. So I am not drinking local. I am drinking my new fave out of Ohio, my Brewdog. Whoop, whoop.
That was a real good suggestion from him.
That was. Thank you, Glenn. We are actually so excited because Brewdog is now all over Texas, and they're at Blay on tap at Nobi and Beers Looking at You. Elvis Juice is like just amazing, but I went Hazy Jane. I felt like it was psychedelic, and it went with my story a little bit.
Okay, then.
Not really, but. It's a very loose collaboration. What are you drinking tonight?
I am drinking my true water, my tried and true water. I don't know what this thing is, water, because I thought it was going to be storming right now because when I looked at the weather, it said it was going to be just downpours all day. It's not raining here at all where I'm at. And so I didn't want to be driving in the rain after drinking. I do have the St. Arnold lawnmower, but I'm good. I'm conserving.
And this is the lawnmower that isn't the lawnmower,
fancy
am I right?
The fancy,
Okay.
I am conserving my favorite recently discovered beer, which is the Snap Crackle from Brash in Houston, because they are not going to have any more for a couple of months. And I'm very sad about that. They did not seem to care that I was very sad about it when I mentioned it. I only have 1 6-pack left, so I'm saving that for real special occasions. You know,
I want to tell a story. Night. I'm not gonna name names, but I'm gonna tell a story. I have friends who drove to Louisiana for beer. They drove to get a beer, and I don't know that I'm pronouncing it right, but it's called Yingling.
Oh, yeah.
Yingling, do you know this? So Jason introduced me to this beer in DC. Whenever he goes to DC, this is the beer he gets. It's in the hotel gift shop.
I thought they had it here in Texas. I've seen it in Texas.
They drove to Louisiana and bought cases.
Yeah. There's a lot
of Yingling.
There's a lot of people that drive to Dallas to because Martin House Brewing is, I think, in Fort Worth.
Martin House.
And they release a lot of their beers only in their tap room. So if they're experimenting with flavors, they only release it there. So people even Blaze had to drive there and pick up cases to bring back to Blay.
Well, guess what? Yeah. Blay had 2 rows of Martin House going on in there. So I went and picked up an Epicurean basket to put it together, a basket that was just awesome. So it was the case files of Case Files with Kat and Ashley Beer Buzz Basket. So I like it. The Texas Beer Buzz. Anyway, I'm going to go ahead and get started. Okay. I know we have a lot of catching up. I do want to say one quick thing, though. You guys continued to listen to us after we took a 2-week break. So thank you for sticking with us. And so I hope that you enjoy our next season. So I'm going to go ahead and get started. Bloop, bloop, bleep. Bloop, blop, bleep. So quick facts. Today, I'm going to be talking a little bit about this topic, but it's like a little bit, but it made me think about what are the most watched television trials? I bet you can guess a couple. But I bet some of them are just because some of them was like, what? Who is that? So now I got to do a story on that guy. All right. So no, but I'm not. All right. So number 1 is Ted Bundy in 1979, right? It's like, oh yeah, that was nationally televised. So that's pretty amazing. Number 2 is William Kennedy Smith. Who is that, you say? This is in 1991. He was actually a 30-year-old Klan member.
Oh, wow.
Charged with rape that he professed to be consensual.
Oh, of course.
And he was acquitted of all charges. So that's good. Number 3 was Jeffrey Dahmer in 1992. Wow. Yeah, we all know that guy. Number 4, the officers who assaulted Rodney King in 1992. Gosh, yeah. I forgot that was totally televised. This one, it was in 1993. They were brothers. Can you guess?
Is it the brothers that killed their parents?
The Menendez brothers, Lyle and Eric Menendez. Yeah. All right, 1995.
I was 9. I don't know.
OJ Simpson.
I don't know when he was in trial.
If the glove don't fit, you must quit. All right.
I wasn't allowed to watch true crime as a child.
You just watched it, right? What were the ones you watched? All right. So 2007 and 2009.
2007 and 2009?
Twofer. He's super famous.
I don't know.
And he was famous before this. Phil Spector.
Oh, I didn't know there was 2 trials.
Yeah. So he had a retrial. That's why it was 2007, and it was a hung jury. 2010. This is an interesting one because this is one of the top most watched because it was a really famous person, and it was like watching a train wreck. Lindsay Lohan.
Oh, okay. So far, all the ones I thought would be on here have not been on here, so I'm kind of surprised.
All the ones that you thought. Number 9. This is the one that I knew would be on here. Casey Anthony. And that was in 2011, which seems like it was just yesterday. I remember watching that thing. Man. Number 10 was in 2011 as well. And I'm going to see if you can guess what he did. Dr. Conrad Murray.
Oh, man. I know this name. I don't remember what he did, though. I do know this name, though.
You do?
I don't know.
He's the doctor who was guilty of involuntary manslaughter of Michael Jackson.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. And number 11 from 2013, similar to Casey Anthony, kind of. I mean, they look similar. Jodi Arias.
That's what I thought was going to be on there. And I was like, what? This case isn't on there?
Yes. So this is a huge one. Daily viewership of over 435,000 viewers.
Yeah, that's crazy.
Isn't that crazy? I think that's just crazy. Okay, so in that vein, seriously, it's like it's a blip of this. So in the vein of televised trials, I'm going to talk about a case that eventually became California's first televised trial. It wasn't national, but it was in California. And that is the case of the toolbox killers. Bleh.
Just before we get any messages, this is not to be confused with the toy box killer that I did before. This is a totally separate thing.
Pieces of shit.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, it's accurate. But what's interesting is the comparison, and after doing some research, the detective on this case, it shows that people who do this work, it really does affect them. And just like your FBI agent, we have a detective here that just was really impacted by this case. Okay, so let me just tell you about who they are. They're killers, toolbox killers. So there's more than one. There are two. The first one is a man named Lawrence Bittaker. Bittaker. I think I'm going to say that that's correct. He was born in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania on September 27th in 1940. He was an unwanted child of a couple who had chosen not to have children. Good start.
Oh.
What do we always say? Never stood a chance. Bittaker was placed in an orphanage by his birth mother and then was adopted by Mr. and Mrs. George Bittaker as an infant. That's great. Bittaker's adoptive father worked in the aviation industry, and that required the family to move around the U.S. a lot. And as someone who's moved a lot, I know that that's difficult, right? I mean, it's very hard on kids. Bittaker was first arrested for shoplifting at the age of 12. Damn. So he started to have a criminal record at 12. 4 years later, he kept getting arrested. Same offenses, right? Petty theft. I was just like, that was his thing. And he was then on juvenile authorities' radar, which is never a good thing, but he was. He was trying to, what he said later as an adult, and obviously this is coming from him, you'd want to take it with a grain of salt, but he would say that it was his attempt to compensate for the lack of love that he received from his parents. I'm guessing his birth parents. He is reported to have an IQ of 138. Very high. The prosecutor in his case, though, said he had a high IQ of 138, but he didn't have a lick of common sense.
Yeah.
So Bittaker considered school to be tedious, and so he dropped out in 1957. And so by this stage in his adolescence, he and his adoptive parents were living in California. Within a year of dropping out, though, he was arrested for car theft. There was a hit and run. He was evading arrest. And so for these offenses, he ended up going to the California Youth Authority where he was imprisoned. And when he turned 18, which was like a year later, when he turned 18, he discovered that his adoptive parents had just basically disowned him and relocated to another state, and he never saw them again.
Wow.
Yeah. So great start. Great start. Roy Norris was born in Greeley, Colorado. I've never been to Colorado. I really want to go there someday. He was born on February 5th, 1948, and he was conceived out of wedlock. And so his parents got married to avoid the stigma of that, right?
Yeah.
Like the baby is born 8 months after the wedding kind of thing. His parents, the extended family lived a very short way from where he lived. And so he ended up spending a lot of time with his family, but his dad worked in a scrapyard and his mother was a drug addicted housewife.
Oh, wow.
Great. Yep. As one does. He occasionally lived with his parents throughout his childhood, but was repeatedly placed in foster care. So, and this is all in Colorado, but when he talks about his childhood, he has very bad memories of his biological parents, just a lot of weird things. Not all of them were true. And then being neglected by many of the foster families he lived with, sometimes like not having like enough food or good clothes, things like that. And he claimed that he was sexually abused by one of the families that he lived with. But he was, at the time when he was 16, he was living with his birth parents, and he visited the home of a female relative so he was 16. She was in her early 20s. And so he started talking to her in a sexually suggestive manner. So she kicks him out. She tells his dad, and his dad threatened to subject him to a beating. At that point, he stole his father's car and drove out to the Rocky Mountains. And this is the only statement on this. It says where he attempted to commit suicide by injecting pure air into an artery in his arm. A, it sounds painful, but B, oh my God, how did he know how to do that? It's terrible. So anyway, he was later apprehended because he was still only 16. He was a runaway. He was returned home. But when he got home, his parents told him, look, you and your sister, we don't want you. And as soon as you're old enough, we're getting a divorce, and that's it. You're on your own. So a year later, he dropped out of school, joined the Navy, and he was deployed to serve in Vietnam in 1969, but he never saw any combat. He was like active combat, even though he was on a 4-month tour of duty. And so then he was honorably discharged from the Navy after a tour of duty. They don't say why. I'm sure there's some history there. So that's their history. That's their childhood history. So Bittaker, back to Bittaker, Larry Bittaker so he gets out of the California Youth Authority because he was in there because he had stolen a vehicle across state lines. In August 1959, he was sentenced to 18 months in prison, and he was going to serve that in Oklahoma, but he was later transferred to a medical center to serve out the remainder of his sentence. I didn't think he was doing too well, like mentally.
Yeah.
In 1960, though, he was released from prison. And so he went back to crime, and within months of his release, he was arrested again for robbery. And then in May of 1961, he was sentenced to 15 years imprisonment. So while he was incarcerated for the robbery, he was diagnosed by a psychiatrist as being highly manipulative. He described him as having considerable concealed hostility. So that's 1961. In 1963, he was released. So in October of 1964, he was again imprisoned for violation of parole. In 1966, Bittaker underwent further examinations by 2 independent psychiatrists. They obviously thought this man was not.
Yeah, all there.
What's the word? All there, I guess. Or
mentally,
he was behaving. Yes, he was. His mental acuity wasn't. Well, I guess I don't know. I'm making that up. All right. So 2 independent psychiatrists, both of whom classified him as borderline psychopath, a highly manipulative individual unable to acknowledge the consequences of his actions. So, of course, he was like, yeah, but that's, my history and my childhood. It makes me feel important. So he was prescribed an antipsychotic medication. And a year later, he was released. Yay. So a month after his parole in July 1967, he was again arrested and convicted of theft and of leaving the scene of an accident. He was sentenced to 5 years, but was released in April of 1970, so like 3 years later. And in 71, he was arrested again on burglary. Bloop, blop, bleep. He just couldn't stay out of jail. In 1974, Bittaker was arrested for assault with attempt to commit murder after he stabbed a young supermarket employee who had accused him of stealing. What are your bets that he was actually trying to steal? Probably pretty high. The supermarket employee had observed Bittaker stealing a steak. He stole a steak, and he followed Bittaker outside and into the store's parking lot, where he asked Bittaker whether he had forgotten to pay. Maybe just, you might have forgotten something, sir. Anyway, so he ended up going to the California Men's Colony in San Luis Obispo. So Norris, in 1969, he was arrested for his first known sexual offense. So you see, Bittaker had all the larceny and all that kind of stuff going on, or petty theft, really, and all that stuff. And so Norris had all the sexual offenses. He was charged with both rape and assault with attempt to commit rape. He attempted to force his way into the car of a lone woman. That's crazy. 3 months later, in February of 1970, Norris attempted to deceive a lone woman into allowing him to enter her home. This is why I don't answer the doorbell, people. This is why. She phoned police, actually, and very, very smart. She opened the door. I would not. And so he was arrested before he had the opportunity to cause her any harm. Less than 3 months later, he was diagnosed by military psychologists with severe, oh my gosh, I'm not going to say this right, severe schizoid personality.
Sounds right to me.
Schizoid. He was given an administrative discharge from the Navy under terms labeled as psychological problems. In May 1970, Norris, on bail, attacked a female student whom he had been stalking on the grounds of San Diego State University and struck her on the back of the head with a rock.
I feel like there was like a cajillion red flags in this story.
Oh my gosh. And that is my, you know what? That's my point. That is my point. That is absolutely my point. All right. He was released 5 years later with 5 years probation. This is my point. We underpunish assault, rape. Look at what he did. He attacked her. He hit her on the back of the head with a rock multiple times. He gets out 5 years later with 5 years probation. All right. So he was been declared by doctors as an individual who was, quote, no further danger to others.
Wow.
The military discharged him because of psychological problems, but these motherfuckers want to say, okay. All right. And then 3 months later, 3 months, no further. He attacked a 27-year-old woman walking home from a restaurant in Redondo Beach, offered her a ride on his motorcycle because, you know, when she declined, Norris parked his motorcycle, grabbed the woman's scarf, twisting it around her neck before informing her he intended to rape her and dragging her into nearby bushes. Fearing for her life, the woman did not resist the rape.
I thought for sure he was just going to tell her that he wasn't a danger to society anymore.
Mic drop. Can we have like a mic drop sound right here? That is just like boom. All right. So although the rape was reported to police, they were initially unable to find the perpetrator. However, 1 month later, the victim observed him on his motorcycle and noted the license number, which she immediately gave to police. So he was arrested for the rape 1 year later, tried, convicted, sent to the California Men's Colony in San Luis Obispo. Guess who else is there?
You don't say.
Yeah, don't say. So actually, according to Norris, so they casually met. They weren't sure about one another, but Bittaker actually saved Norris a couple of times from being beaten up by some fellow inmates. And so they kind of started to become friends because you know what they shared? They shared a common interest in sexual violence and misogyny. Norris was divulging to Bittaker the biggest stimulation for him was seeing the fear in women, which just makes me want to. And so this was his primary reason that he amassed a lengthy record for sexual offenses. So Bittaker, who was, you heard his rap sheet, it was all petty theft. He actually divulged to Norris that if he ever raped a woman, he would kill her so as not to leave a witness to the crime. So like, he was like, oh yeah, I'll rape her, but then I'm going to kill her immediately. Like, that's just where his mind went.
If I was going to do it, I mean, you know.
Don't leave a
Clearly
witness.
he had thought about it.
So when they were alone, they would discuss plans to assault and murder teenagers. That's specifically, they liked teenagers once they were free. They had a plan to murder one girl of each teenage year from 13 through 19.
Oh, Jesus Christ.
If the word teen was in their age, they were going to do it. And so they just made a vow. We're going to connect. If you get out first, I'll look you up. I get out first, you look me up, right? So Bittaker was the first to release in 1978. He was actually a skilled machinist. And so in 1978, he was making $1,000 a week. That's a baller for 1978. That's a lot of money. And although he was described as a loner, he was always he donated to the Salvation Army. He always he would like buy fast food and wine and hand it out to homeless people in downtown LA. He always had booze, beer, and pot, so that the local teenagers would always want to be at he lived in a hotel kind of place. And so they would always go, oh, well, that guy's always got booze and weed. And so even though that was against his parole, this is what he was doing. He loved the teenagers socializing with him. Ugh. So at 3 months later, on June 15th, 1979, you almost kill a girl, and this is what you get. You get to get out in a few years. Norris was released from prison and moved into his mom's home in Redondo Beach, but he found employment as an electrician in Compton. Shortly thereafter, he received a letter from Bittaker. In late February, the pair met at a hotel, and they rekindled their plan. So using Bittaker's money, they purchased a silver gray 1977 GMC Vandura in February of 1979. The vehicle was windowless on one side, and then it had on the passenger side one of those large sliding doors, right?
Yeah.
They called it the Murder Mac.
Wow.
That's not even a good name. That's just
it's really not.
138 with
really
the 138 AQ. It seems lazy. 138 IQ and you come up with the Murder Mac. It seems lazy. You're right. So this is like, obviously you have the sliding door. Don't go near vans. If you're parking in a parking lot, don't park next to a van. And I think that's 101.
But also, I didn't realize as a teenager how weird adults who wanted to hang out with teenagers were until I became an adult. And I'm like, man, those people were really?
Yeah.
Like when I was a kid, I just thought it was cool. Like the adults want to hang out with us, or they're the ones like they're giving us beer and stuff. And like, I thought it was like, because they thought we were cool. And I was cool because, older people. I never thought about it being weird until I became older and realized how weird it really was. Because as an adult, I do not want to be around fucking children. Like teenagers specifically. I don't like teenagers and I don't want to be around them. And so now as an adult, I'm like, man, those adults are weird.
But like I know teenagers, but like as a mentor, right?
But you wouldn't have like teenagers over to drink and do drugs and stuff. Like you don't. Right. Like that's what I'm saying. It's so weird to me that adults would enjoy that now that I'm an adult. But as a teenager, I never thought about it. I just thought.
And you know what? Even as an adult, I haven't. Just now, like you bringing that up, I'm like, God, how many adults did I? Oh, Jesus. Yeah. That's weird. Yeah, that's weird. Don't do that, adults.
Talk
don't
to your teenagers,
teenagers. Okay, so all right. So from February to June of 1979, the pair picked up over 20 female hitchhikers. So they did not do anything to these girls. These were what they called practice runs to see what would work to help the girls get into the van.
Oh.
Because they would slide open that sliding glass door. I was about to say that. It's a sliding side door. And they would like, hey, you going to the beach? You want to ride? And sometimes it worked. Sometimes they worked their shtick out. Right?
Yeah.
That's smart.
I had to say that is really smart.
138 IQ. I mean, it comes in handy except for Murder Mac. Anyway.
Surprised they had like spray painted on the side or something.
I know, just like free candy, not rapists. Okay, so they found they looked around because they had this new car. They were driving around all the time. They found this place in the San Gabriel Mountains, and it was really super secluded, but it was cut off. It was it was called a fire. Dang. A fire road, a fire road. And so it was cut off. It had a lock on it. And so what Bittaker did was he crowbarred it with his toolbox. It's coming in now. So the toolbox, he broke the lock, put one of his own on there. And so it looked locked all the time, but he had the key. So so they had a very secluded place. No one's going to accidentally get there. And it was a perfect place. So now that everything was in place, their ruse, their location, their secluded location, everything was in place. They killed their first victim. And it was 16-year-old Lucinda Lynn Schaefer, and this was on June 24th, 1979. And, as I was doing the research for this, I honestly, you know, and if you've been a longtime listener of the show, that we want to give the victims of these crimes as much respect as we possibly can, because what happened to these girls was horrible. And I don't want to traumatize or re-traumatize other people by hearing what actually happened to these girls. I won't give you everything. I want to be mindful that what they went through, what their families went through, with just all of it. It's very difficult. It was difficult to read. It was difficult because so much of it was captured. There are pictures. There's audio. There's.
We'll have the links to the sources in our episode if you really want to read what happened to them.
So I'm going to cut some of that stuff out. Know that in the time that this happened, like, man, people were still hitchhiking. People were still accepting rides from strangers. Like I say all the time, I don't know how anyone survived the 70s, but this is in no way to say that these girls are at fault. They were young. They were trusting. I am still that trusting. I am still that naive. So I am not putting any of this on them. So I'm just going to say that. I'll leave it at that. Okay. So Lucinda Lynn Schaefer. So she was 16, and on June 24th, 1979, she was last seen leaving a Presbyterian church. She was at a meeting. She was visiting like her grandmother, and she was like, "Oh, I'm going to go hang out with the teen group." Right. And so, in his written accounts of the events of this day, Bittaker stated that he and Norris first finished constructing the bed that the pair had installed in the rear of the van, beneath which they placed their tools, clothes, and a cooler filled with beer and soft drinks, as one does. At approximately 11 a.m., the pair drove, quote, to the beach area, drinking beer, smoking grass, and flirting with girls. We had no set routine. But at approximately 7:46, Norris spotted Schaefer walking down a side street and remarked to Bittaker, "That's a cute little blonde." And she was gorgeous. She really was just a gorgeous, gorgeous girl. And they followed her a little bit, saw where she was going, and then kind of drove to where they could stop the van, get out, and plan for her arrival walking. Does that make sense? They went ahead of her, knowing that there wasn't really anywhere else for her to go. So they went ahead of her, parked. He got out to pretend like he was working on the car, and then she approached. And so one was inside, and that so Norris exchanged a few words with her before he got her into the van and closed the door. And he, using a ruse that he would repeat in most of the subsequent murders, Bittaker turned the radio to full volume as Norris bound the victim's arms, legs, and gagged her with duct tape. And they drove her, as they did with everyone else, out to the San Gabriel Mountains. And so she was actually really smart, and I think she was like in survival mode, and I don't know that I would have reacted the same way that she did, but their recounting of the events is that she regained her composure. Oh, and man. she was like, look, this is, Bittaker says this, she displayed a magnificent state of self-control and composed acceptance of the conditions of which she had no control. She shed no tears, offered no resistance, and expressed no great concern for her safety. I guess she knew what was coming.
So fucking awful.
So, I won't go into the details of what happened to her. Know that she was tortured, violently raped multiple times. And the reason that they got the name of the Toolbox Killers was because of the vice grip pliers that they would use to use coat hangers, and that's how they would kill their victims, with the coat hangers around their neck that they tied and tightened and tightened and tightened with using the pliers. They also used things like sledgehammers, things like that to hurt their victims, but it was all normal everyday run of the mill tools from their toolbox that they had. Her body was wrapped in a plastic shower curtain and thrown over the canyon, which was right by where they had discovered a tree to give them shade if they were in the hot day sun. But they were able to get over to like a little cliff and dropped her down in the canyon. And at that point, the animals would just eat her up, and there wouldn't be any more evidence left. And they have never found her body. The next victim, Andrea Joy Hall, July 8th, 1970, 9. So this was 2 weeks later, 2 weeks. And she was 18 and she was hitchhiking along the Pacific Coast Highway, and they slowed down to offer her a lift, but another vehicle pulled over and offered her a lift too, which she accepted. But the two followed the vehicle from a distance until Hall exited the vehicle in Redondo Beach. So she got a safe trip to Redondo Beach, but they were ready to offer her another ride. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
So Norris hid in the back of the van in order to dupe Hall into believing that Bittaker was traveling alone. So Bittaker said, "Hey, do you want to grab a drink? We got beer, we have soda, or I have beer, I have soda in the back of the van." And so she's like, "Yeah, sure." So she goes back there, and Norris, who's hiding under the bed and the bedspread's covering him up, pounced on Hall when she attempted to retrieve a drink, and she fought, and it was strenuous. But he managed to subdue her by twisting her arm behind her back. And Norris then gagged her with adhesive tape and bound her wrists and ankles. They were all done the exact same way. Again, driven to San Gabriel Mountains. She was raped twice by Bittaker, once by Doris. At one point, Norris saw what he believed to be vehicle headlights approaching. So Bittaker covered her mouth and dragged her into nearby bushes as Norris drove in an unsuccessful search for the vehicle he thought he had seen. But when he had returned, the pair drove to a location farther into the San Gabriel Mountains, and more things happened. Polaroid pictures were taken, and I'm not going to talk about that. But if you really want to know about it, there's lots of information on the internet. Like I said, they loved the look of sheer terror, and so those are the times when the pictures were taken. I will say that Bittaker took pictures of her when he said, I am going to kill you. And then, but she was gagged at that point, and he decided to take the gag off at that to get a real reaction rather than just her eyes. He wanted to see her whole face. So he repeated that he was going to kill her. And then that was the picture that he really, that was the one. That was the chef's kiss picture for him. Jackie Doris Gilliam and Jacqueline Lee Lamp. On September 3rd, Bittaker and Norris observed two girls named Jackie Gilliam and Jacqueline Lamp sitting on a bus stop bench located close to Hermosa Beach. This is all right, just like right by LA. If you've never been to LA, it is 30 minutes from downtown LA. It's not far. It's basically part of LA. That's what everyone, I live in Redondo Beach. I live in LA. What part? Redondo Beach. That's what people say. So it's all very, very, very close. So Hermosa Beach is right there too.
I feel like I need whiskey or something. I don't think a beer would even be helping me right now.
Welcome to season 4. So, so they offered the girls a ride, but and of course they accepted. They were offered pot. They accepted. Both of the men say they picked up the girls, but both of them were not in any way wanting Lamp. That wasn't one of the girls they wanted. They wanted Gilliam. And so Lamp was sort of left alone, though she was eventually killed, but she had to watch her friend. And it's awful. What Norris would say about her was that she would look at him and he stopped being able to even, because she was just pleading with her eyes, and if you can imagine what that is. And he said that he just they had to put her outside of the van because he just couldn't have her looking at him anymore. Because just the guilt of that. Sorry, someone's opening my door in my house. Okay, so they realized soon though that the Bittaker was driving in a direction that was not in the direction they said to go, and Lamp, who was 13, Jacqueline Lamp was 13, attempted to open the sliding door, and she was really close to getting out, but Norris hit her and was able to keep her in the van and knocking her unconscious. And so he was able to overpower the 15-year-old Gilliam. They again were driven to the San Gabriel Mountains. They were kept hostages. Ugh. And they each would take turns with them, and the other one would act as a lookout. They forced them to pose for pictures, for Polaroids. They would also get mad at them if they said, "Why aren't you screaming like you did?" Norris got really upset. One of them was screaming because of Bittaker and then didn't scream because of him. And, just they wanted them to be terrified. They wanted them to be scared. They wanted that level of fear. Like, that's what did it for them, and that power over them. And so it was just they did what they did, whatever they had to do.
And how they could feel so guilty by looking at them, but then still continue to do what they were doing. You felt guilty enough to tell her she had to stay outside, but not guilty enough to not do it. I don't know.
I like I said, I'm not going to get into what they did and to the specifics. If you're really interested, it's really awful.
Very awful.
But the like I said, the use of tools, just like your toy box, the use of tools was prevalent in what they did to these girls. And that's all I have to say about that. What was different about these two is that a lot of them were actually they were hours and hours, a whole day of this. It was very drawn out. It took a long time. This wasn't done quickly. It wasn't they weren't two pump chumps and that's it. That's all I wanted, and then they would kill him. It wasn't like that. It was torture in more ways than you could probably think of for these girls. But these girls in particular, they were kept for 2 days in captivity, and at Bittaker's trial, Norris claimed that he had suggested that Gilliam be killed quickly, as unlike Lamp, she had been largely cooperative throughout the period of her captivity, whereupon Bittaker replied, "No, they only die once anyway."
What does that even mean?
Keep them alive longer.
Oh.
Do all these things to them longer, right?
Were they the 2 youngest?
Yes. Gilliam was struck in each ear with an ice pick and then strangled to death. Bittaker took Lamp out of the van and said, "You wanted to stay a virgin, now you die a virgin," before Norris struck her upon the head with a sledgehammer, but then strangled her to death. And then she was thrown over. Both of them were thrown over an embankment into, and I don't know how to say this, it's a chaparral or chaparral. 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 Probably should have looked that up. So that's 4. All right. So Shirley, Lynette Ledford, Bittaker, and Norris abducted their final victim. She was 16. Shirley Ledford on October 31st, 1979. She was at a gas station. She was hitchhiking from a Halloween party. She had gotten in a fight with somebody and it was like, I'm just going to hitchhike because that's what people did, So she recognized Bittaker, actually. And so she was able to take that ride from him because she recognized him. She worked at a restaurant. He was a regular. And she had a part-time job there as a waitress. So she recognized them and was like, hey, yeah, okay. I'll go home with you.
Awful.
I know.
These people are so awful.
She was offered marijuana. She refused. They drove the van to a secluded street where Norris drew a knife and then, of course, bound and gagged her as well. Bittaker then traded places with Norris, and he decided that he was going to audio record on tape all of this, right? So Bittaker tormented her, initially slapping and mocking her, and then beating her with his fists as he repeatedly shouted for her to say something. Then as Ledford began screaming, shouting for her to scream louder. As Ledford continued screaming, Bittaker began asking her as he struck her, "What's the matter? Don't you like to scream?" Just a nightmare. So she started to cry, was repeatedly begging him to not hurt her, don't touch me, all of those things. The pliers came out again. Rape, sodomization, all on tape. All on tape. Shortly after, Norris switched places with Bittaker, and so he also wanted to get on tape, and so it's all on tape. And go ahead and scream or I'll make you scream. That's a quote. In response, Ledford pleaded, "I'll scream if you stop hitting me." And so then she let out some screams to say, "See, look, I'm going to scream as long as you don't hit me." He took a sledgehammer and started hitting her elbow repeatedly, same elbow over and over and over again. 25 consecutive times on that same elbow. And he said, "We've all heard women scream in horror films. Still, we know that no one is actually screaming. Why? Simply because an actress can't produce some sounds that convince us that something vile and heinous is happening. If you ever heard that tape, there is just no possible way that you'd not begin crying and trembling. I doubt you could listen to more than a full 60 seconds of it." That's Roy Norris describing his recollections of the audio tape.
Can you imagine having to be the people who watch or listen to these recordings to convict these people? I would not have been able to do it. I wouldn't have been able to handle it.
Oh, yeah. So they actually threw her body out and landed in like someone's ivy bush out there. So it's the only one they didn't throw over the canyon. And so joggers found her. A man named Joseph Jackson, who had known Roy Norris, caught up with him again. They were at the California men's colony, caught up with him again. Roy Norris just like, bleh, like just said all of it, told him everything, like just... I don't think he felt good about it, but just told him everything. So this guy was like, I got to tell my lawyer. So the lawyer says, you got to tell the police. So he told the police. So Detective Paul Bynum was assigned to investigate Jackson's claims. So he did all the investigating. He matched a report to this other woman named Robin Robeck, who had said that these two guys maced her, raped her in the back of a van. She picked them out from the pictures, all that stuff. They did a stakeout. They were breaking parole, so they got picked up. So they were arrested. She couldn't place them out of a lineup, but they had already done all these. There was pot. There was all kinds of things. Like they were breaking their parole agreement, so they were arrested. But as they were searching the van, they found that tape. They found the tape, and Ledford's mother did did say that was her daughter screaming on those tapes. They
God,
also
how awful for a mother.
I know. They also found bracelets and Polaroids and different things that were souvenirs of each of the girls, and actually Norris was like denying all of it, but then he saw the mountain of evidence, so then he started talking. But obviously he was sort of making Bittaker the more of the leader in all of this, but he was the one. He did a lot of the talking, and so. He talked, he said a lot, and he was a little flippant about it. It wasn't like, yes, I did. I mean, there was still like, blech. I mean, he still did it. But according to Norris, the level of brutality Bittaker had exhibited toward their victims had increased on each successive instance that they had lured a girl into the van, and their final victim had actually pleaded to be killed in order that her agony could cease. And when they went into Norris's hotel room, they actually found this kind of acid that they were planning on using as a torturing device on their next victim before they got caught. So their next victim would have even been subjected to even more horrific treatment. So they searched the San Gabriel Mountains, but like I said, a couple of the girls were not found. They did find the skeletalized bodies of Lamp and Gilliam that were found on the bottom of the canyon. And like I said, Ledford was tossed into the front yard of somebody in LA. But there were still two bodies who have not been found. They were formally charged though with the murders of the 5 girls. Bittaker was denied bail. Norris's bail was set at $10,000. That's because he cooperated and told them as much as he could. But he said that there were more tapes that they just weren't able to find. He accepted the plea bargain, so he would testify against Bittaker in exchange for them not seeking the death penalty. So Norris pled guilty on 4 counts of first-degree murder and 1 count of second-degree murder, 2 counts of rape, 1 count of robbery, and so that was in exchange for his testifying against Bittaker. So he was sentenced to 45 years to life with the eligibility for parole in 2010. So Bittaker was arraigned on 29 charges of kidnapping, rape, sodomy, and murder, in addition to various charges of criminal conspiracy and possession of a firearm. He was also charged with 2 counts of conspiracy to commit murder dating from December 1979, in which he had unsuccessfully attempted to persuade 2 inmates due to be released to murder Robin Robeck in order to prevent her from testifying against him at his upcoming trial. The charges against him for Robin Robeck, however, were dropped because of lack of physical evidence. And she did not identify them in the lineup, though she picked them both out in the pictures, just could not pick them out in the lineup. Bittaker remained silent. He did not during his trial. In response, the judge entered a plea of not guilty on his behalf. When they asked him if he pled guilty or not guilty, he was silent. So they said not guilty on his behalf. His trial began January 19th, 1981. And obviously their star witness was Norris. That's who they had. And Norris stated that in June 1979, he had unsuccessfully attempted to abduct and rape a woman who escaped unharmed. When he informed Bittaker of this incident, they both agreed to act together on all future abductions so that nobody ever lived. So in reference to the actual murders, Norris stated that after he unsuccessfully attempted to strangle Schaefer, which was the first one, Bittaker had strangled her with a wire coat hanger. And so, I mean, that just became their thing. The pair had then thrown her body into a location at or near the San Dimas Canyon. In reference to the murder of Hall, Norris stated that he had been told by Bittaker to drive to a nearby store to purchase alcohol when Hall was murdered, after which he returned to find Bittaker smiling and holding Polaroid pictures he had taken of her after informing her he had intended to kill her. And those are the two pictures I told you about. Several witnesses, not one, several witnesses had testified to Bittaker actually showing them Polaroids of his victim. So he was bragging as well, just like Norris with that other gentleman. Bittaker couldn't keep his mouth shut either, and so a lot of that was used against him. So
people saw Polaroids but never turned them in.
Yeah.
Wow.
So the audio recording of Ledford that we talked about earlier was actually the most damning evidence at trial. And like you said, I couldn't imagine being those people, but like the court reporter actually left the courtroom. She was sick, not a bystander, a person, like not a witness, just someone who's watching, an observer of the trial. She ran out of the courtroom, and there were people in like the news media was outside of the courtroom. You could hear the screams. There are Channel 2 News standing outside of the courtroom doors, and you can hear the screams through the closed door. And there's a woman running out just crying. And then there's another woman, and that was the court reporter, right? And just you could just tell, there's just a lot. The prosecutor who had already heard all of this, he was just beside himself. The prosecutor, there's a really good documentary. There's a YouTube link that will be in the show notes. Excuse me, it's called The Devil and the Death Penalty. And it's just a lot of really great interviews. But one of the part that really I like is it's a very good, lengthy interview of the prosecuting attorney. And you can just see how it just really, really hurt him. Even to, it's just the one girl, but he can just imagine what the other ones went through as well, because that's all they had. And it was really hard. I mentioned the FBI. I know this episode is going really long, and I apologize. So I hope you're sticking with us. But what I said that the FBI agent in the Toy Box Killers, or Detective Bynum, who was initially brought on to investigate Norris because of this other witness that came forward, or corroborating witness anyway, he 5 years after their convictions committed suicide because he feared that they would get out and that they would go after him for the work that he did. The prosecuting attorney says in the documentary that it actually drove him mad, especially the audio. He was married, had children, had a daughter. He revered women so much. He loved women, held them in such high regard, held them up on a pedestal. So to hear this young girl going through what she did, it broke him. And he eventually, 5 years later, he never could keep it together after that. So when we say that these are the things that we can't imagine doing ourselves, we can read these stories. We're not looking at it. We're not looking at the pictures of what happened. We're not actually hearing the audio of what happened. But it's bravo to the men and women that are putting themselves in the line of fire, I guess. So yes, they went to jail. And I'm just gonna skip ahead now. Bittaker was actually sentenced to death. So Norris got 45 years to life. Bittaker was actually sentenced to death. But he was one of the guys that I believe that you mentioned, and I think I actually mentioned too, the craziest lawsuits from inmates. He was one of them. He was the soggy cookie inmate. Bittaker was.
Oh my God.
right? Do you remember that?
I don't, but I mean,
We're crazy.
that sounds
Like
typical.
I got a soggy sandwich and a cookie, and my cookie,
okay.
my cookie was broken when they gave it to me.
Oh, okay, I do remember that.
Yeah, so it's the broken cookie soggy
yeah.
sandwich. That's Bittaker. That's him.
Wow.
Yeah. So they actually like labeled him this like crazy litigious inmate, right? Because he this is how he postponed his execution, by continuously litigating the California Department of Corrections. So it's crazy. And so he actually had three dates set for his execution date set, but he ended up dying of natural causes on yeah, I know.
It's bullshit.
He was incarcerated, still on death row. And on death row, he didn't live a grand life. It wasn't like he was in the general population. They still kept him very much alone. But he died on December 13th, 2019 at the age of 79. And so that was to natural causes. And so Norris actually died of natural causes at the California Medical Facility on February 24th, 2020, at the age of 72, having been transferred to this facility 1 week prior to his death. He had, since his conviction, he had repeatedly claimed the sole reason he participated in the murders was out of fear of Bittaker. Norris also claimed to have twice contemplated confessing to his and Bittaker's responsibility in the murders to police. He also claimed to have successfully deterred 3 potential victims from entering Bittaker's van. There's really no way of knowing that. Although Norris readily admitted that he enjoyed the intercourse with the victims, he claimed only Bittaker enjoyed the acts of torture and murder, stating, "I didn't enjoy the killing. That was Lawrence. It was his favorite part, watching the women struggle to live, knowing he'd soon be taking life away." That was his quote. The audio cassette Bittaker and Norris created of themselves raping and torturing Ledford remains in the possession of the FBI Academy, and this recording is now used to train and desensitize FBI agents to the raw reality of torture and murder. And that is my story.
I hate that they died from natural causes. It pisses me off so bad.
It does, and it's a very strange way to be. In theory, this is somebody that you want to be on death row. This is somebody that you want to be served justice. The reality of the death penalty is it's not always fair. It's not always exacted in the way, there are people who are let out of death row all the time. But God damn it.
I'm kind of surprised, I'm kind of surprised they didn't get killed in prison, because typically people who commit crimes against children are the first to get, but they're considered worse than actual murderers.
That's what I'm saying, though, that they were actually kept from general population. They were they were kept in an almost they were almost kept in isolation because of their notoriety. The really famous people, especially people like them, they were, so they didn't share a cell or anything like that. Side note, interesting point. Bittaker actually, let me pull this up. I'll just read this to you. Convicted killer. This is from the Dallas Morning News. Convicted killer Lawrence Bittaker, awaiting execution for the torture slayings of 5 teenage girls, was married earlier this month to a former male roommate who reportedly underwent a sex change operation, prison officials confirmed. Bittaker, who was convicted last year on 26 felony counts, including rape, murder, and kidnapping, and sentenced to die in the gas chamber, married a woman identified only as Barbara, February 2nd, in a ceremony in the prison's maximum security visiting room. Prison officials who refused to give the bride's full name said a Marin County clerk presided at the ceremony. The bride reportedly had a sex change operation after Bittaker was arrested in early 1980. Albert Garber, Bittaker's former attorney, told the Daily News of LA he is sure the woman who married Bittaker was the same one who contacted him during the trial. She called and said, this is a quote, she called and said she wanted to do everything in her power to help Larry, Garber said. Since we needed all the help we could, I asked Larry about her. He told me she was a transsexual who used to be his male roommate. I decided not to take the offer of help, he said. Since prisoners on death row are not allowed conjugal visits as other married inmates are, Bittaker and his bride did not consummate the marriage, prison officials said. There was a short visit after the marriage, but they were allowed no privacy. Deputy District Attorney Stephen Kay, who described Bittaker during the trial as, quote, one of the most vicious, cold-blooded killers in the history of American crime, end quote, said he was shocked that any woman would have anything to do with a guy like that. Torrance Superior Court Judge Thomas Fredericks, who presided over the Bittaker trial, expressed surprise when told that Bittaker had married. You're kidding, he said. He would marry him. Bittaker's trial, historic in that it was the first felony trial in California that allowed cameras in the courtroom over a defendant's objection, left many of the participants emotionally scarred because of the sheer brutality of the crimes. And then it goes on and on and on about the trial.
You know, women, I don't know, women who marry inmates that are in there for murdering and torturing and killing women, just, I don't understand it.
I don't either.
I don't get the appeal to write them in any kind of romantic fashion. Like, I just don't get it.
There's a really good there's a really good interview with an Australian novelist. She had written like 4 or 5 novels before this, but she spent 2 years writing Bittaker and getting to know him. And he never really accepted. She actually did go visit him in person before he died. And he, you know, so when he died, she had actually spent hours and hours and hours talking to him, right? And she said he never really accepted his role in the killings, never really saw. He was a narcissist, and so it wasn't really him, right? It wasn't his fault, right? None of that. He just he said to her, and you should listen to her tell the story, but he said to her, for 30 years before this happened, I was a good guy. And since that happened, I've been a good guy. So really, I've been a good guy for a majority of my life. You can't judge me on this short amount of time in my life. Like, that was his true feeling about it. I'm like, oh my God, what if everybody thought like that? What if, like, God damn. Yeah. I know. So definitely worth, I'll put that link in the show notes as well, but it's definitely worth watching because you're just like, what the bleep?
Yeah.
Anyway, well, hey, we don't have questions of the week, but I know, and that's okay. So we're just gonna end this on not a high note. We've gone way over time, so I hope
it's okay.
That's like the worst one this season. That's it. That's my worst one. I don't know. I didn't go into details.
I don't know.
I did not go into details. I don't know.
Let's not get ahead of ourselves. God. We always say that, and then we always end up doing something worse.
This is pretty bad.
To be fair, it is the worst one of the season thus far. Yes.
Oh, man. Well, again, thank you, everybody, for coming back after a 2-week hiatus and for sticking with us. If you are just catching up, don't listen to the first season if you haven't listened to anything but...
Oh, my gosh. Stop. Next week, I'm doing a story that was sent in by a listener. It is a Texas story.
So send us your stories.
It involves lots of things. True crime, murder, famous stuff, I guess. Lots of things are rolled into one story. I want like an Oklahoma story or like a Minnesota story or Ohio. Ohio, send us a story. I'm drinking your beer all the time. Yeah. Or like another country. We I can't pronounce any of the words, but I can't pronounce English words either.
I'll try to do the other countries.
I picked all American stories for the rest of season 4.
Oh God. Oh God. Okay,
So,
but if
anyways,
if it's the UK or Australia, you can still do those, right? You can still do those. That's all.
Obviously
Canada.
not, because I pronounced the Isle of Wight as the Isle of Wight or whatever.
Oh my God.
Glenn still makes fun of it to this day. He says it's the funniest thing he's ever heard in his
It
life.
was really funny. It was funnier when it was like, oh my God, I'm dying, Isle of Wight, not Isle of Wit. That was really, God, that was funny. All right, well, you know what? We love you guys, and we missed you.
We
and
do.
We will see you again next week. How can they follow us?
We are on all of the platforms: Facebook, Instagram, all of the podcast platforms, Twitter. I don't know if I said Twitter.
Like us, rate us.
You can message
Review
us, review us, tell your friends. Come back next week, every week.
Come back every week because we will be here. But until then, please take care of yourself, stay safe, and be kind to one another. And we'll see you next week.
Bye.